Let's do it.
Hey, everybody. If you're checking this out, you are now deep into Movable Type's annual state of the art issue. This is there, we never play favorites, but this is an annual issue for a reason because we want to hear from the storytelling community, which ranges, of course, from our beloved writers to our musicians to our artists and everything in between and beyond to hear what's going on and hear stories from the trenches, talk about practical tips and give some encouragement and see where we are, and we can measure this year to year and week to week. Tonight I am joined by my dear friend, the amazing Jenna Blum. Let me formally introduce her, and then I will talk about how I've come to know her. And if you're a 1455 fan, you already know her. Jenna is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of the novels Those Who Save Us. This is an original copy from the first press. The Lost Family, the novella The Lucky One, which is in the collection Grand Central, and the memoir Woodrow on the Bench, which was part of 1455's author series. Last year, it's an unbelievably touching memoir. If you love dogs, it's an absolute must read. If you don't love dogs, read this and you will love dogs and Woodrow.
No, thank you.
Among a lot of other things, because her bio is so long and you need to go to jennablum.com and check it out. She is one of Oprah's top 30 women writers. Her work has been published in over 20 countries. She is the co-founder and CEO of the literary social media marketing company, A Mighty Blaze, which we will talk about tonight. Oh, and she was the keynote speaker of 1455's fourth annual Storyfest last summer. We've got it all on tape. You can go watch the conversation and you can celebrate all things Jenna. So she's here. She is based in Boston and she has taught and teaches at the Grub Street Writers, and she's run master fiction and novel workshops for 20 years. So that should clear up. We're on the topic of writers getting paid. Why would I want to talk to Jenna? Why wouldn't I want to talk to Jenna? So writers getting paid is the topic, and I'll tee it up accordingly. Jenna, it's always a delight and a pleasure to speak to you, obviously. But it's especially meaningful to have you here dropping knowledge on this topic tonight because you have had a career inside the literary machine, but you've also had the purview of everything that happens both on the margins and the mainstream and everywhere in between. You're a huge advocate for writers and writing. So I know you've got all kinds of awesome thoughts. I'll just kick it off by saying this should not be an elephant in the room topic. Writers getting paid, I think, used to not be a quaint notion, and now it's kind of this prickly, thing that we dare not speak about. And I think in our late capitalist gig model hellscape, it's become even more pertinent to address these issues. So welcome, and let's talk about writers getting paid.
Let's do that, my brother from another mother. Thank you for having me. I love this man so much, y'all. And if you all know Sean, obviously, because you're here, but he is one of my very favorite people in the green room. We're like, we should do this every single week just so we could see each other because it always makes both of our days better. But it's because we're like so committed to talking about writing and to making writers' lives better and lifting everybody up. So yeah, let's talk about this, Ish.
Let's get it on. Well, so we were talking, as we do, a few weeks ago, and I mentioned the state of the art issue. And as these things happen, because everything is a metaphor for art, we started riffing, and I said, you know what? We should save some of this for a proper conversation. But I don't even remember exactly what we were talking about. Probably our mutual nonprofits, and how making money and asking for money is always difficult and tricky, and it shouldn't be, but it always is. So I just want you to I can ask questions, or what's your quick take on how have things changed since you broke into the scene? Is it getting worse? What's going on? And what are your high level thoughts on the notion of writers getting paid?
I mean, my highest level thought is writers should get paid. That is like my number one thought. You should get paid for your work. And I think that, and I have other thoughts about this, but I think that often people don't think of creatives as being worth as much money as people in other professions. Like if you're a doctor and you don't do your job well, somebody dies. You know, if you're a lawyer, you don't do your job well, somebody goes to jail. If you're a writer, you don't do your job well, like people don't read your book or they put your book down. They're like, okay, whatever, you know. But and it's true. Sometimes I have an anecdote about this. I think what we do is not ditch digging. It's not like working in a Alzheimer's unit during COVID. You know, there are people out there who really are like breaking their backs and their psyches and their souls every day doing their jobs. And what we do is work. It is a profession. It requires training. It requires dedication. Like, and I will ask you, how many people have said to you in the world, like, oh, I always wanted to write a book, but dot, 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 right?
Yeah.
And I always want to say to these people, like, I always wanted to be a doctor, but I forgot to go to medical school. Like, you know, you can't do it without putting in the work every single day on your craft. And that's why I think writers should value their time and their work as much as people in any other profession. And it's our job in a way to respectfully and politely demand that of people who are asking for our time and our creativity for free.
Yeah, I mean, perfect. And you know, I'll relay an anecdote because this I started noticing this. So in a former life or one of my former lives, I analyzed the tech industry in addition to doing other odd .com-y type jobs, but I really followed kind of the trend lines. And it was an interesting time to be in technology because we were seeing everything from the beginning of the internet to blogs to, you know, everything that happened with the transition to digital. But one of the first trends that I noticed, and I noticed it first, and I'm sure there are articles written about this, but what was being called the Huffington Post model, which was, we're not going to pay you, but you're going to get all this exposure. And that was always a very kind of tenuous and very sketchy proposition. But when you see the data and someone says, we get X amount of hits a day, and you're never going to get that on your blog, it can become very enticing for someone. And I never had a firm opinion. I thought it was, and I still feel it's up to the individual to determine, you know, are you going to hold out? I think the reality is if you're going to get published in a major outlet, you kind of have to take that opportunity. But I had the opportunity on two occasions, I would say in the mid aughts, that I got front paged at Salon back when they were getting a lot of hits. And I remember thinking, this will be an interesting test case, even if it's just for a day. Let me see what my Amazon rankings are, just to see front page by however, you know, million hits a day or whatever they got at their peak. I was on that front page all day, and I went to my Amazon rankings, didn't change at all. So I say this, well, because no one wanted to buy my book. No harm, no, like, I don't take that as an indication, but in my own little small sample size, it was even more depressing to think, if you aren't getting paid, you're getting that promotion, but maybe the promotion isn't even really worth a lot. And it leaves you feeling like very helpless, because obviously the media landscape has changed to the extent that money isn't even talked about as a currency.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I hear that a lot about you should be contributing to this because of the exposure. And I think in some ways that is true, especially if you're a writer who is aspiring toward your track record or working toward your track record, that does help. And I wonder, I have a sort of a counter story to that in a way.
Right.
And I wonder sometimes if it's because of the content of what you're writing about, right? So for instance, if you had been like, okay, I'm writing about my book and here's like a personal story that I have that's attached to this book, and
Yeah.
then that's what the piece is about, and then it goes out to a million people, those
Yeah.
people then might be more likely to buy your book, especially if there's a live link in the story. And the reason I say this is my friend Trisha Blanchett, who works with me on A Mighty Blaze, she's our podcast director. She also runs a nonprofit called Operation Delta Dog that trains rehoused dogs, like stray dogs basically, to be companion dogs to veterans who suffer from PTSD. So they train the dogs, they house the dogs, they match make the dogs with vets, and then they go from there. And Trisha has been working for years to make enough money to do this. Like, it costs a lot to train a single dog, whatever.
Right.
And she recently wrote a piece, and I think it was for the Huffington Post. And all of a sudden, like, she was writing about how hard it is to run a nonprofit and how hard it is to ask for money, and how once she did a fundraiser in like a school gymnasium and went to the bathroom and somebody stole like the $5 she had collected. You know, I mean, it was just this whole like trial and tribulation thing. And then she talked about why she continues to do it and like why she loves it. And she got so many donations in one day that she can now stay afloat for the next
Right.
year and train more dogs. So I think there's like a direct link to the content. Like then you might make some money. But for instance, if I write a piece for HuffPo about getting my belly button pierced, which I actually did, and that's going to run pretty soon, but then in the bio it says Jenna Blum is the author of blah 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 blah. Like I'm not going to see a big hit for my books, right? Because
Right.
nobody's going to be like belly button piercing, buy this novel about World War II. It just kind of gets your name out there. So
Yeah.
I think you should sort of like parse out like what you hope to get with
Yeah.
that piece. Like my hope in writing a piece about my belly button is not that suddenly people get all their belly buttons pierced. It's more
Right.
like somebody follows me on Twitter or Facebook on or
Yeah.
Instagram, and then
Yeah.
maybe when I do sell a book, they see that promotion.
Yeah, no, and it's clearly it's a very incremental kind of endeavor. And yeah, I mean, so full stop, any opportunity to reach a wider audience, even for a standalone piece, is a significant achievement. I also, I had an even less cynical, from a tech angle, the thinking about my own life, content is now being churned out to the extent that even if someone reads a particular piece and thinks that was pretty cool, if I hope I see that author again, and then they open their next window and they're down that next rabbit hole, it actually would require someone, even if they were inclined, to click on the link to your Amazon or your website, figure out what the book is. So your point is very well taken. There's no one test case. I just remember thinking I was old enough at the time to actually be kind of the Huffington Post model is sketchy, but this is an opportunity that in our analog era, we never would have had unless we wrote for the New York Times or the Washington Post. So it was just a little deflating to think that I was kind of vouching for this kind of new normal. And, it certainly was a slap in the face of like cold, hard reality. But, I think that brings us back to square one, which is, look, in writing in general, I mean, reading about this, it doesn't seem like authors across the board are doing better other than in, unique cases. So that's a worrying trend too.
It is. And I don't mean to say the Huffington Post model, and I think you're right to call it that, basically started providing written content for people for free. And that was a slippery slope in the same way that it is in the music industry when you can get stuff for free. Or
Right.
newspapers, of course. Like we've seen what has decimated the newspapers in this country is that people are like, why should I pay for this? Why is the Washington Post behind a paywall? Why is the Times behind a paywall?
Right.
Because the writers need to get paid and the
That's
paper
right.
needs to get created and printed. Like you're actually paying for people's jobs and professions and their expertise and their time. So I think that it was a dangerous model. It provides us with exposure on the one hand and makes us into clickbait, which is like good in my world, but
Yep.
also like it erodes the idea that people should get paid for writing, that they should get paid for content. And in fact, nothing has changed. In order for us to produce that content, it's not like it takes us less time or we like dream it somehow into being. Like you still have to put your butt in the chair and write it and revise it and polish it and get it out there. So
Yeah.
you're being either not paid or paid less for the work that you do and for your time, and that's not cool. It's not good.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, how about this? So people like you and myself who run nonprofits are trying to figure out ways to promote story and storytellers and writers. And so I would love you to brag a little bit about A Mighty Blaze, because look, one thing I think we would all agree on is yes, getting people paid is an end goal. The reality is in every individual artistic life, it's a war and you have to win a certain amount of tactical battles. So one way to do that is to support other writers, give them exposure, make sure that their work is being lifted up and potentially reaching audiences. You are an expert at that, and Mighty Blaze is like this guiding light for so many of us. Talk a little bit about the origin story there and how you're using that platform to kind of try to figure out some of these problems.
Yeah, I would love to. So actually, I don't know if you can see this, but
Mm-hmm.
right behind me, my friend Tom DeMarkey, who runs the Sanibel Writing Conference, when I first formed Blaze in 2020, gave me this plaque. This plaque arrived at my house, and it says Mighty Blaze LLC. So I have to be like honest with y'all. Like Mighty Blaze is not nonprofit, for the simple reason that I did not want to spend my life looking for grants, writing for grants. I don't know how to do it. I've never
Yeah.
done it. Like I've always worked for money, money in, money out. And so I was like, that's the model I want for my company. And so we're not a nonprofit. But that said, everybody who works for Blaze is actually a volunteer and is not paid, including myself. It just is like a different structure, a different way that we pay taxes and so on. And people sometimes at readings will say to me, like, well, how does Blaze make money? I'm like, Blaze doesn't actually make money. Like right now we're running a fundraiser for Blaze because we need to keep our lights on and keep blazing. So to answer the question you actually asked, Blaze, it was formed in March 2020 in response to the pandemic canceling authors' book tours. And I remember sitting in my apartment as, we were all sitting at home on this certain week in March, like the first week of March 2020, and watching my friends' book tours go out and be canceled and canceled and canceled. And I know how long it takes to write a book. If you're lucky, it takes you a year. If you're, a normal writer, it takes you like 3, 5, 10, 20 years, your whole life. And I felt so bad for my friends watching their work get extinguished, or like the way to reach their audience get extinguished. And especially bad too for the debuts who, were just poised to introduce their work for the first time to the world and then couldn't do it. And so I said, F no. And I called my friend Caroline Levitt, who is an amazing novelist, who has a book coming out next year called Days of Wonder, coming out in March. And she was running something called the Nothing is Canceled book tour. She was putting authors' videos on her blog. And I was like, surely maybe if we join forces, like all the little lights that are going out in the world, all of those books, all those tours, we can join them all together in one place and make a mighty blaze. So that's where the name comes from. And Caroline was like, that's a great idea. And so I am a social media person. I'm the weird writer who actually likes social. So I kind of threw up some social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, put Blaze on all of those. And Caroline has great media contacts. So she's a book reviewer. So within a week, it was like we were the only lifeboat rowing away from the Titanic. Like every writer who had a book coming out came to us and said, please put my book on social media. It's coming out on Tuesday. I don't know where else to turn. And we were just inundated in the best possible way. And like 2 weeks later, I had 35 creative professionals working for me. And I've never run a company. I've never aspired to run a company. So I was working like a 16-hour day, like in my underwear, and then like getting up and doing it all again the next day. And that has gone on for 3 years. And now we are like sort of like a TV network for authors. We've become known as being an author interview network. And so we have 9 regular shows that range from the Tuesday debuts to Crime Time, to The Thoughtful Bro, which is sort of esoteric literature, to a cookbook and author show, to Friday Frontliners, which Caroline and I do. It's like the authors who have legendary status, like John Irving and Cheryl Strayed, and then we go down to Kat. And David Duchovny came on, and I was like, oh, did my breast fall out of my shirt again? Sorry, David. Oh, sorry. And if you're interested, like we interviewed George Saunders and Alexander Vindman and Erica Jong, and so if you're interested, you can go to A Mighty Blaze on YouTube, and that's where our literary library, going back to March 2020, exists. So like now we have like hundreds and hundreds of interviews with authors like in their living rooms, which is actually pretty cool, I think.
It's so cool. And so, yeah, I want to, first of all, I mean, that, that's everything that's going to become one of the, historical footnotes in the literary world of what happened for good during a really bleak time for the art world and for humanity. One of the things I think we both can share, and it's just been such a neat thing to see, one of the outcomes of the pandemic is it forced some of us graybeards into embracing and leaning into the opportunities technology provided. And suddenly it made all the sense in the world, right? To go from an author event is a live reading, that's just how it is, to saying, you know what, if we do this virtually, it doesn't cost much. It's freely accessible, and people from literally around the world can watch it live, or we record it and then we have this backlog. So we certainly do not have the same number of videos, but 1455 now has its own little library of recorded conversations and from the festivals, and those live on forever. So there's something really like it's not just making lemonade out of a tricky situation. I think we both can attest that that model now continues as we go back in the real world and love our live events whenever we can do them. These virtual things are, I would say 5, certainly 10 years ago, would have been pie in the sky, or people wouldn't even have understood why would you do that. And now it's like, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah, you don't even have to put on pants like to watch your favorite author. I mean, think about it, like before the pandemic, also, you would not have been able to see Cheryl Strayed in her living room, like giving an interview. You would not
Right.
have been like, who would even think the first 2 weeks we were up and running, we talked to John Irving. And I remember I was so nervous before we did that interview. I had to do a belt of bourbon beforehand. We were all like shaking, and
Yeah.
also we didn't know how to use Zoom and broadcast it to Facebook very well. So there was the chance it might cut out. Like the first author we had on actually was Anne Lamott. It was like, holy crap, like these are the
Right.
people like I have idolized my whole life.
Yeah.
So I think it's an amazing privilege to be part of this fabric that unites us all. And the way that the digital platform does that is it brings you authors if you're in an area where you can't get to a reading. Like not everybody lives in a major urban area where an author is going to show up at a bookstore. And if you are, you may not be able to get out of your house. And I just was looking at our Blaze fundraiser, since we're running the fundraiser this week. I was looking at our donors and sort of like getting really teary with gratitude that people, have been so plugged into our work. And
Yeah.
somebody wrote, like, thank you for this. I love watching the interviews in Australia. And I'm like, that is what it's all about, right? Like, we're now building a worldwide community through technology. And yes, I love getting out and about, going to author events. We had a Blaze-a-rama last night that's an in person writing party. So we're like, going back out in the world. But I feel very strongly convinced that we need to maintain the digital platform for readers to prefer not to leave their houses and yet want to see like excellent literary programming like you provide, like 1455 provides, and like we strive to provide.
Yeah, I mean, look, we talk about the crisis in the humanities and the whole woke, which has become both a buzzword and a very cynical opportunity to not engage. But for us in the artistic community, how dare we, if we're going to talk about diversity and inclusivity, doing things like this that are free and available, both, like we said, in real time or as a recording. That's a real way to show that we can be inclusive and everyone's invited to the party. There's just something very meaningful about that. And certainly that exposes these authors to an audience that even right. And again, I think you and I are on record. Like there's nothing better than a live event, but we can do both. And the idea of exposing a writer to an audience they never could reach, even on the most funded book tour, is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
That makes me think of another thing. You mentioned that you are the rare writer that loves social. I would say that you're a unicorn of sorts, but more people, I think, certainly in the last several years, have accepted the fact that to be an artist in today's world, you cannot afford, in every sense of the word, to be aloof. You have to at least be conversant. You have to have a website. You have to have some kind of social media handle where you can engage. I think that's another avenue for us to discuss writers getting paid. Again, we're always talking about the Benjamins, but there's a lot of ways to get those Benjamins. And one of them is for a writer to make themselves as discoverable as possible. Being an expert at that, maybe talk a little bit about what you would advise someone, or from your own experience, how you've made yourself easier to find.
Thanks. So I love social ever since I discovered Facebook in like 2005. And I got on it then because there was for a minute something called Dog Book that accompanied Facebook where you could go put your dog's profile up. And I saw that. I'm like, oh, my dog, then Woodrow. Now I have a dog named Henry. But Woodrow did not have any friends. Thank you, Sean. Woodrow had no friends on Dog Book, and I was very indignant about that. So I'm like, I'm just going to spend 5 minutes, throwing up his profile on Dog Book. And then, of course, I went down the rabbit hole, did what everybody else did in the early days of Facebook, which is to look up all their exes and be like, what are you doing now? What's who you look like now? And then it became like this whole phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you like, I'm so old. Like I remember in Facebook Landia when you could only post statuses in the third person. So it'd be like Jenna Blum is doing blah blah blah, and it'd be like Jenna Blum is wondering why she loves the smell of bleach so much. It was like weird shit like that, And I was working on my second book at the time, and I was in a motel living by myself, writing this draft, hammering it out. And trying to do it without distraction. And every day I would go on Facebook and post an update about the book, like what I was working on, or some research thing attached to it. And I started to build community that way because people were interested. And I was like, oh, maybe if you let readers into sort of like a little bit of the behind the scenes, like not giving away all the secrets, like you don't want to show Oz behind the curtain, but it's kind of like just keeping people feeling like they're going on this journey with you, which is what writing a book is.
Yeah.
Like maybe it gives them more investment when the book actually comes out, because we've all been in this together. And so ever since then, I was like, bing, like it helps me, it helps them, it connects all of us. And so ever since then, I've been enjoying actually like using all, I know you're like, what? Like using all of the tools that are at our disposal to try and see like, how do you reach more people with this and how do you make their day a little bit better? So like, there's Facebook for like all of us ancient people. There's
Right.
like, Twitter, which has enjoyed its own tarnished reputation recently, but it's still a platform that I feel like you can use for good if you're not violently opposed to it. Instagram, of course, I'm on the gram, and then there's the dreaded TikTok where everybody's like, like everybody over a certain age is like, not TikTok, and everybody under that age is like, we don't even know what the Facebook is. Like, who cares,
Totally.
So, um, I think it's important. I think every writer out there can think of this as talking about money. It is a free form of coming into people's homes and saying like, hey, this is my book, this is why I wrote it, this is why I love it, this is the research I did, here's my dog, here's my piranha, here's my my beautiful flower garden. But
Yeah.
why would you not use that avenue? And to the writers who hate it, which is literally every single writer, like I run a marketing company for writers, and the writers who work with me are just like, we don't want to do the social JB, you have to do it. I'm like, guys, no, in that case, I would say hire somebody to do your social media when you're on tour.
Right.
Like you need to like budget for that. And in fact, I love me a good independent publicist. I've worked with two excellent ones. I would now hire a social media person over an independent publicist because you're probably going to get more bang for your buck doing that. So if you are an author who is budgeting because you have a book coming out, you're like, what are my, necessary expenditures? A website, maybe an assistant if you're going to be super busy, and a social media marketing person who can help you get out there.
I mean, I hope everyone's listening. That's such great advice. It's so, I mean, obviously it comes from an expert who can validate her own experience, but I guess I would say everyone can and should listen to that. But just in case there are some folks listening that are thinking, I don't have any budget and I can't do that, I guess I would just encourage everyone to, I think the prevailing shtick within the broader literary community is, now I have to be a writer and a publicist and a marketer and a tech, guru to do my website. And the reality is, yeah, but I think those of you that weren't alive pre-internet, I think most of us, if someone had told us circa 1993, there's going to be this tool for free where you can do all these things, most of us would have said, beam me up, Scotty, and I want to be there today. So it is a hassle. It is the new normal. It's a lot of work, but I think Jenna would agree, if you put the time into putting a book together, especially a novel, you have put all of yourself into this. Give it the best chance to be discovered and be discoverable. And I'll also throw in a pitch, and I'll put this a link in the piece. My friend Jane Friedman, who is like the guru of all things writing, I mention her often. So if you're a 1455 fan, you should know who I'm talking about. She has a book called The Business of Writing. I'll put that link in. You can find it on Amazon. Jane Friedman, IEDMAN, janefriedman.com, I think. She is a living repository of tips and combining both the technological kind of know-how with the marketing shrewdness. So there's another resource that I would encourage everyone who feels lost and feels like I can't do all this. You can, and doing a little bit might go a long way.
Oh, hugely. Also, one of the things I would encourage you to think about if you hate social, we're sort of getting down the social rabbit hole, but this is one of my favorite things to do, is talk to writers about social media to make it less awful, to like kind of try to dispel the phobia about it. And one thing I would say to you is, it's DIY, right? So if you're like, I don't have the budget for a publicist, who are you people? I don't have the budget to hire somebody. Like, it's part of your job as a writer to promote yourself, but it doesn't have to take over your life. It doesn't have to reveal your underwear. It doesn't have to invade your privacy. Like there are ways to get around that. And if you put it on your to-do list the way you do, like picking up the dry cleaning or doing whatever, like it spends like 15 minutes a day doing this, that goes a long way. The consistency does. And you can also, I mean, again, like we should talk about this on a different Zoom. I'd be happy to, but I think that like the first thing you do is figure out what you're comfortable with posting and not posting, and like what is your author brand? Like what do you want your persona to be? And think of it as another creative work, which it is, because I don't go on social media and tell the whole truth about my life. Like you see Hemingway's iceberg tip on my social media page. Everything I post is true.
Yeah,
But like 99% of my life that day is totally underwater. It's invisible to whoever is watching it,
that's
and
right.
they see like 1% of my life. And you get to choose that, and you get to use that
Right.
as a tool to reach your audiences. And Sean is so right. Like pre social media, here's what I was doing to promote my first book, which came out pre Facebook, if you can even remember such a time. Like email was like still a relatively new way to reach agents at that point. I was like busking. I mean, I had business cards printed up at Staples and tucked them under people's windshields. Like I put them on the bulletin boards at Starbucks. Like I would go to any house of anybody who asked me to read that book. And I still do that. And my first book became successful miraculously because I started going to book clubs. Yeah, and that was the fabulous cover. It had a concentration camp on it. So talk about pushing a rock up the hill. This is not the most reader friendly cover. And I would go to book clubs and say, if you like this book, please pass it on to one other person. And that actually worked, but it took 3 years before that book jumped on the bestseller list. And
Yeah,
I was going to 3 book clubs a day in person and like spending all of my, you don't get paid to do that, so it's kind of like, I
yeah,
would still do that. I will do anything I can to promote my books. Ain't nobody gonna love your book as much as you do, no matter how much they admire it. But it's like your job to get it out there. And so I would encourage you to think about social media as a way you can do that again without even putting on pants. Like you don't even have to leave your house to do it.
that's right.
But figuring out like what you do want to do and how you can promote your work, like that will help you get paid.
Yeah.
Um, so that's kind of what it comes down to. Like you got to shake your tail. Nobody's
Gotta
gonna
shake your
do that.
tail and look. I mean, at 1455, it seems like in almost every author discussion I have, it does come back to some fundamentals. Whether this is helpful or the last thing you want to hear, it is the truth. You can't write a book without one page at a time, one day at a time. It's not going to write itself. No one's going to write it for you, and the book isn't going to promote itself. So there, to an extent, you are responsible for creating the work and then getting it out into the world. And yes, at a certain point, some things have to click and happen. Jenna, you are you being the bestseller on this conversation. I'm certain you have been hearing for years now from people that are like, how do I do it? How do I do this? How do I do that? We've talked about a little of it. Is there anything that I haven't brought up as someone from your kind of vantage point? What do you tell writers that, again, we're acknowledging that getting paid is the end result, but also I think breaking that down a little bit and saying to get paid, you've got to do other things aside from writing the damn thing.
I mean, I think you have to write the best book you can, to be honest, and then you have to be lucky. And
Mm,
not all books are going to be bestsellers, no matter how well you write it. I think that there could be a formula to writing a book, right? Like my friend Julie Gerstenblatt just came out with a book called Daughters of Nantucket. It's her debut novel. She's 52. She's like, I'm a debut at 52, and I'm so proud of her. She was in my workshop. And the book is set, it's a story about 3 women whose lives converge on Nantucket during the Great Fire of 1846. And it has enjoyed like robust attention and like robust book club attention. And she was like, I realized there could be a formula here that you take an aspirational setting and you put a book there like Nantucket. Everybody wants to go to Nantucket. Everybody wants to go to Paris. Everybody wants to go to Hawaii, whatever.
yeah,
Or England, like there are always going to be Anglophiles, right? And then you have a disaster in that setting because then something happens in the story. And she's like, boom, there's your winning formula. And I said, what is your next book about? Are you going to use that formula? And she's like, no, I'm writing about 2 women from Nantucket going around the world on a shopping spree in 1862. But the point being, like, you write the best book you can, and some of the books are lucky because they have that sort of like built-in plot or they have a built-in draw for the audience. and some don't, but it's the book you want to write. And I think any writer has, a career writer has maybe, I don't know, like how many books, 5, 10, 15, 20 books, depending on how quickly you write. Like
Yep.
two of them, one of them might be a classic or a masterpiece. Like
Yeah.
maybe 2 or 3 of them will be like really good. Most of them will be competent. 1 or 2 are going to be stinkers. Like no matter how hard your effort is. But if you write the best book you can, I think that's your best bet toward getting it out there. And I hear a lot of writers be like, well, I wrote a couple drafts. Now I'm going to send it out to the market, send it out to agents. And I'm like, that is so disrespectful of the agent's time,
Yeah.
of your own work. Like it needs to be as good as you can get it before you send it out. You need to make it as perfect as you can get it, with the knowledge that it will never be perfect. And then you get it out there. And if that takes you 17 years, then take 17 years. And then your book has a better chance than if you're like, I'm going to churn out a book a year, because that's how you make money. And they all are not ready. Like they're not baked. Like don't send your half baked cookies out into the world. So that's
Right.
part of it. I think I don't I don't think there's a trick to being a bestseller. I
No.
really don't. I think again it is that like sort of lucky confluence. Like my first book was a World War II book, and it was a mother-daughter story. It was a story that hadn't really been told yet about the point of view of the German woman. And then book clubs really dug that book, and so
Yeah.
that was what pushed it onto the list. And that was a lucky thing. The next 2 books were a much harder uphill push. Like
Right.
one of them was a Boston Globe bestseller, one of them was a Midwestern bestseller. Like Woodrow was a Midwestern bestseller, but none of them enjoyed the same success as the first book.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry to say. And you know what? That's okay. And maybe my next one will be a monster blockbuster. Like you never know. You got to keep going for the gold
Yeah.
ring. But I think writing the best book you can and then working as hard as you can to promote it with whatever tools you have available to you,
Yeah.
like the combination of grit and grit, it's like that's what's gonna
Well,
help.
for sure. And listen, Jenny, you're being typically, which is usually the case with accomplished and good human beings, you're being excessively modest. You kind of glossed over it, but the simple fact of the matter, again, for this is some real talk for people checking this out. It hopefully is actually inspiring to you to hear that there is no formula, there is no magic trick. It's not about knowing someone in the industry. You'll notice that Jenna said it took her 3 years. And I don't want to misquote. What was the number of book readings you did at book
Oh
clubs?
God. I mean, I went to, for those who save us, I went to over 800 book clubs in the Boston area alone, which was a joy and a privilege. And it
Right.
also was like 3 years of my life, right? So it's like that was the tool we had available because there was no social. There are also books that are like really lucky right out of the gate and are
Sure.
good books. Like there's a woman who wrote a nonfiction book called The Other Family Doctor. She's a veterinarian. Her name is Dr. Karen Fine. She's a terrific woman, terrific veterinarian. And
Mm,
she's a Bostonian.
mm,
And the book came out a couple of months ago, and she had asked me for a blurb, and I gave her a blurb, and then I interviewed her for a Mighty Blaze. And the day I interviewed her on the Blaze was the day her book jumped onto the New York Times list. And because she is a veterinarian by trade and not an author, she didn't, I don't think, quite have it sink in like how extraordinary that was. Like the book, was out
right.
for a week and it jumped onto the list. And those of us who play this lottery every day are like, what, how? And it's not that the book wasn't deserving. It's a really good book, but I also feel like it was a lucky book. She had a huge order maybe like placed for like vets across the country, like veterinary schools,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there are ways in which your book can get lucky, and you can get lucky, and you have to write a really good book. And we also all know there are a lot of books on the bestseller list that are really awful. Like
Sure.
they're not well written books, but they have good story, and people always love story. So,
Yeah.
who knows? I wish there were a formula. I would use it, but
Right.
wouldn't we all? Like we
Yeah.
would all be like Colleen Hoover, but only Colleen Hoover can be Colleen Hoover. It's just like we can't all be Coho. And even
Yeah.
Coho doesn't know what her formula is. She is like honestly bewildered by her mass success. She's like, I have to have gates on my house now because I don't know what happened to my life. I was just a nice lady who liked to write stuff after work. Like, you know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think again, like um, writing the best book you can and then working as hard as you can to get it out there that's the only formula I know, and then some luck. And
Yeah.
even still, like we don't, all of us, like you don't go into writing for the money. Like if you're lucky, you make a living at it. So let's talk
That's
about
right.
the money. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, and so another thing that you brought up that I think is worth lingering on a little, as it relates to writing the best book you can, you've certainly done a lot of teaching. You're a fan of the workshop. You're a fan of the individual experience. What about people that come to us and say, I don't have a community, or how do I find a community? Never mind the fact that the good news is it's never been easier to connect with all these tools we've talked about. But what do you tell people that are looking for that feedback and ways to ensure that when they do finally send their book out into the world, it's as good as it could be?
Oh, that's totally invaluable. You cannot have a book without beta readers. Because it's like trying to cut your own hair. You can do it, but like it's going to look really weird in the back. Like you really need people to help you out with this. Even an author who's fairly self-aware, and I am self-aware of the potholes and plot holes in my own work. Like I know, and you can't sneak that over on the reader. You can't sneak it over on an agent or an editor.
Yeah.
And so you kind of, as a writer, have a sense on your radar of like, maybe this isn't working, but I don't know how to fix it. I'll just slide it out there. Like, don't do that. Like get beta readers. And by beta readers, I do not mean your mom, your spouse, your best friend. Even if like my best friend's a great reader, that's nice. Like
Yeah.
let your best friend read it, but you also need a group of industry people, and by that I mean other writers. So it has never been easier to find a writing community. Like Grub Street has writing community, a Mighty Blaze has writing community, local colleges, community colleges. Like there are very few areas in the country I can think of that don't have access to a writing community of some sort. Like some are richer with writers than others. Like Boston, where I am, is lousy with writers, as my friend Chris Castellani says. But
Yeah.
the good news, again, also about digital is like you can hop online and like participate in a writing workshop from the Loft in Minneapolis, the Story Studio in Chicago, like and again, like the Blaze, we're going to start running online workshops, and Grub has online workshops, and you guys offer. So I think it's really important to find you some people
Yeah.
who can keep you company on the journey. Like it's hard to write a story, it's hard to write a book, it's hard to get it published. There are classes for all of this, and they are not prohibitively expensive. So
Right.
I think it's really important to find your people, and then those workshops often spin off independent communities who
Yes.
meet in each other's houses. Like my friends here and the people working with me on the Blaze, who are now like they're my family, like literally, like these are the
Yep.
people I spend holidays with.
Yeah.
They are from my writing workshop at Grub Street. And now for Blaze, like we were all together in February 2020 and got our workshop shut down. We were on Zoom the next week. And then when I started Blaze, I'm like, who wants to start this crazy thing with me? And everybody was like, I do. So we are all like so bonded.
Yeah.
And being in workshop really bonds you with other people.
Yeah. No, here. I was hoping, yeah, that's gold. And again, I would just kind of come in behind that and say to everyone, it has never been easier. And another positive side effect of all this disruption, I mean, it's not a positive development, but the fact of the matter is there were editors and very connected writers who were putting their shingles out and doing workshops. They're doing one-on-one, they're doing things, they're easily discoverable, on Facebook, on the internet. Ask around, but you can get some tutelage from some very impressive people, for prices that are, let's put it this way, a hell of a lot less than say going into an MFA program.
Oh, totally. I do manuscript consultations myself. It's like, here's another reason you should be on Twitter, even if you never do another damn thing. Find the writers you like and follow them.
Yep.
Right. I mean, because then you can ask them, like, do you do developmental consultation? A lot of us do. Like Anna Solomon, Heidi Pitler, who edits America's Best Short Stories, like they just formed an editing cabal, and so they edit people's books. And my editor for Harcourt, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, who published my first book, is now like a solo editor as well, like giving this like super high level advice. And it is less expensive than an MFA. It's less expensive than an independent publicist. And it will actually probably solve your book's problems for you. Like most of the clients I work with are actually excellent writers. And the problem with 99.9% of books I see is structural. It's architectural. And so if you like send me your book, then I can be like, okay, I'm going to do a reverse outline on this and figure out, you really break it down. It's not sexy. It's mechanics. It's math. It's novelist math. But that is what is going to keep your book moving along, and that's what's going to like help you get it out there. I also want to give a plug on Twitter for like follow the industry people. Jane Friedman is on Twitter all the time, and I cite her all the time, not just for how to do social, but like she does a query letter. Like she has a query letter compendium. If you need to write a query, all of that information is out there, and you can actually like communicate with these people on Twitter. I know Twitter is like Elon Musk is, he took away my check mark. I'm not paying for a check mark, Elon. Like, go to Mars, go back there. But at the same time, like, there's such access that we did not have as baby writers coming up.
That's right.
To your favorite people, like, Erica Jong's on Twitter. Like, Tatiana Monet gave me a blurb because I stalked her on Twitter and like slid into her DMs like late at night. So it's like, you need to go check out your people there and build
Yeah.
some rapport and build some relationships and some traction. Do it 10 minutes a day. Like, it's like a multivitamin. Just go do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, here. And I think, this does seem inevitable, at least from my perspective, but we talk so much at 1455. We talk about craft, but we always come back to community. And just in case there's anyone out there having heard all this, it's like, what do you mean community? The through line of everything Jenna and I have talked about is this notion of be part of something. It is a very solitary endeavor. And you've heard Jenna and I both say, butt in the chair, daily, word count. You've got to get the work done at your own pace. But the reality is, it is very lonely. And even if you're successful, what is the fun if you can't share it with anyone? Find your people, seek out these groups, seek out these experts, and you do build your community. And with all of these neat tools that are out there, it's never been easier to connect with people, and you never know where those connections are going to lead, whether it's a blurb, whether it's a publicist, an agent, etc. There's nothing cynical about that. In fact, I think it's the lifeblood of a healthy artistic community. And again, I don't want to speak for Jenna, but I know she and I have the same perspective that being part of this is very selfish because it enables us to lift up others, celebrate the work of others, and you don't feel like you're in your own little navel gazing enterprise, because that's a very hollow endeavor. Even if you're successful, you're miserable because you can't share the good news with people.
Yeah, this is like the best thing in my life is talking to you, Sean. Like, we know this, but both of us are completely dedicated to serving other people. And it sounds, I don't actually, that doesn't sound that corny. It's just like, this is what I do. And part of it is because I have been lucky. Part of it is because serving others serves me. But I like to pay this forward. But it is like teaching too. Like, there's never, ever been a time that I've walked into my classroom, whether in person or virtual, that I don't walk out again feeling better. And it doesn't matter what is going on in my life that day. I was teaching when my mom was dying. It was like I could still walk into a classroom and walk out feeling like those are my people. Like, there was one class that I taught during the pandemic that I was never in the same location because I was traveling so much after like a super, super bad breakup. And I was like peregrinating around the country. And, literally I would sign in on a Wednesday night and people would be like, where are you now? And I'd be like, I'm in Georgia. And they'd be like, okay, we aren't even going to ask. But like, that class was like the linchpin of my week. It was really great. And because I was helping other people with their work, it made me leave feeling so much better. I think like also the accountability part of a community might offer us something a little bit new in terms of the isolation of being a writer. And I would love to invite everybody watching to like help me crowdsource an answer to this question, because one of the things that we're thinking about with Blaze is, how do we best serve the community as the world opens back up? And that's why we started having these in-person events called Blaze-aramas that are writing parties where you get together, you write for an hour with people, and then you drink. And that we've had 2 of those so far. We're going to branch out all over the country and do them and do workshops, which is great. But what about, as we started out talking about, people who can't get to one of the places where we are, or can't go to a writing party, or don't drink and just want some help like every day, like getting in the chair? One thing I was doing during the pandemic is 10:30 every morning, I would open up a Zoom room and be like, come and write with me. Like, we're all going to like put our intentions in the chat. We'll turn off our cameras and our sound, and we'll just write for an hour. And after that, we'll jump off and put what we accomplished in the chat. And because we were accountable to each other in that way, we all showed up. And it was like writing with friendly spirits in the room. Like, I know my friends were all there. And one of the things we want to do with Blaze is offer this online accountability, like 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I don't know what time yet, but like, how much would people pay for that? Like, what is it worth? It's not like I'm going to charge like $20 a session for that, but is it worth $2 to come and like be in a company of other writers, and then have maybe a social component to it afterwards for like half an hour where everybody talks about their work? Like, I feel like for me, it's always been very useful to have accountability buddies. And so that's something I would love to offer the community in an online way. Like, would you guys like that? Like, put your comments in the chat. Let me know. I'm Jenna Blum at jennablum.com. Like, come find me on all social. Like, I really want to know because I want to serve you. Or are you like, I'm not paying for any of that. Like, I'm just going to do that with my friends. Totally fine. Like,
Yeah.
I would love to know. But I do think, again, that sort of band of brothers effect and that community building is so helpful. And you don't know where it's going to lead, but you do know that you're not so lonely when you sit down in the chair by yourself.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. It's going to be plastered throughout the issue. I talk about Blaze all the time, but folks, enough said. The Mighty Blaze, there's so many resources there. There's so much content that they've already created. Get behind them, support them, figure out how they can help you. And I think it's abundantly clear why I love continuing to dialogue with this extraordinary woman. Jenna, one of the many reasons that I really adore you and I am so inspired by you, we've seen it all tonight. You're old school. You've got an old school sensibility and street cred. You're an old soul, but you embrace all this cutting edge stuff. You are the sum total of what is possible in 2023 because you combine all the good stuff from what we look back fondly on, but you're marching forward with purpose into an ever uncertain future. But you're convinced of a few things: write the best book you can, be kind to others, pay it forward when you can, be part of a community, and love the job. If you're doing those things, guys, you're doing yourself right. And I think the money will follow. But some of the things we talked about tonight, I don't think is disingenuous. To get to the money, you've got to get to yourself, and you've got to get through some of these other issues, and then I think good things will start to happen.
It's true. And even if the money doesn't follow, like, you're spending your life doing something you love with people you love doing it with. Like, that's so important. I mean, again, like, I would love to have money follow. That would be amazing. Like, I do, money affirmations where I did this once in front of a bank camera when I was like making a deposit with cash, and I was doing this thing I saw on Instagram from one of my gurus saying, money loves me. Money is obsessed with me. It stalks me. And then I realized that I was on camera and I was like, okay, bye. I mean, I love money. Who doesn't love money? And I hope that I get giant advance or giant book deal. Like, we should all not be afraid to say that. Like, we should be
Sure.
paid for our time and our good work.
Yep.
And I have the understanding that because I'm in a creative profession, like, I am not a hedge fund manager. Like, I am not somebody who works for money. Like, I'm somebody who works because I love my work. And if I can make enough to get by, and I'm doing it with people I love and building things every day, like, that is the way I do. And I know that's not the same for everybody, but I'm telling you right out there in like writer land right now, if you're doing this to get rich, you are not doing it right. You can get rich. That will be nice. And you should hope to get rich. But if you're doing it to get rich, go be a hedge fund person. Like, go into money. Like, there's a lot of freaking money out in the world.
Right.
Not a lot of it is apportioned, I don't think, to writers. And that's okay. So you have to know why you're doing it. And I know people say, I'm doing this because I love the work. That is really great. I do it because of the community, I think. Like, I love to write. It connects me with other people. I'm a teacher. Like, I have, a job teaching, job speaking, like a lot of supplemental income that's all writing related. But it all is about like being plugged into the community and talking about the thing that is most important, which is story and how that connects us all. So that is my advice. Like, hope for the money, get that dough if you can. Like, do not be shy about it. Do not be afraid to ask for what you're worth, like money for your time, money for your work. Like, you don't ask, you don't get. And at the same time, understand that you're probably not going to be making like $1 million a year unless you're like Harlan Coben, and even he is like a really nice guy. So,
Yep. Yep. And again, and we can always pay each other in books, and that's a currency we can all get behind, because who doesn't love to receive a book for their love?
Look,
See,
I have books. I have Sean's books.
this is how we do it, folks.
This is how we do it. I have Rhapsodies in Blue, and I have the wait, where I'm looking the wrong way. The Black and Blues poems, which I love. I love these so much. They're so beautiful. And I just started reading poetry this year in earnest. I told Sean that I start every day by reading a poem on print, on paper, in bed in the morning, so that instead of like picking up my phone first thing, I'm picking up words. Like in the olden days, remember that?
Right. William Wordsworth just turned over the right way in his grave.
You're
Our,
welcome, Bill. Yeah.
our forefathers and sisters are loving it. So
Yeah.
yeah, more poetry, more money.
More poetry, more money. Yes, exactly. That's exactly what. Dope.
Well,
Mo-
Jenna, as always, an hour flies by, but you are the greatest. On behalf of everyone that's enjoying this, thank you again, dropping wisdom, dropping knowledge. Your your perspective on these things is so soulful, so uplifting, and so relevant. We can't thank you enough. And we're going to see you soon because that's what we do.
I'm so excited about that. Let's bring it. Let's talk about more stuff. I love seeing you, my brother. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for watching, and go out and write well and get that dough. Get it.
Get paid. We'll see you guys soon. Thanks for checking out 1455's Movable Type. Go check out Mighty Blaze. Bye.